Hello, everybody. This is Andrea. And before I start, I have to tell you that whenever I say hello, everybody, what pops into my mind is something older folks might recognize, which was a chant we did when we were kids. Hello, everybody. This is Harry Cemetery. If you're good, you'll go to heaven. If you're bad, you'll go to hello, everybody. And for a second grader, oh my God, that was the funniest thing in the world. Anyway, I'm back again, trying the podcast again. Practice makes perfect, and perhaps if I'm imperfect, I should just ditch these things. But after putting a fair amount of effort into organizing podcasts, recording podcasts, and finalizing podcasts, waste not, want not, I can't bear to throw them away. Anyway, let me get started immediately and throw myself into all the things I have tagged and want to talk about. I'm going to start by playing a very short video for you. It is from USA Today, and if you're listening to this, the caption is Dinosaurs, Pikachu, and Frogs. These were the costumes spotted at No Kings protests across the country. And what the video shows is people wearing all sorts of costumes. Some of them are just Halloween-ish, but an enormous number are animal costumes. And this is noteworthy. The point of the costumes is ostensibly to separate ordinary, good-hearted leftist Americans from the black-garbed Antifa protesters who we are assured don't actually exist. Now, of course, they do exist, but the costumes are meant to hide that fact. And the costumes are really, really interesting. Not on their own, they're just silly, but they're interesting for a few reasons. One, they reflect the feminization of American leftist culture, the whole theater kid quality. And when we think of theater kids, we tend not to think of robust masculinity. We tend to think of gay men and greasy-haired girls. I'm sorry, that was theater kids when I was in high school. It's a very feminine, emotional culture. And as I wrote in an essay today, riffing off a hugely popular post by Helen Andrews, the left is largely characterized by that feminine quality of thinking emotionally rather than rationally. And I've been saying this for years, but Helen Andrews said it better. She said it wonderfully well, and it is an essay worth reading. You can find it wherever you're looking on the internet. But this theatrical quality, this feminine quality, is going to be geared towards costumes. Another reason they do it is because they're trying to show, again, that they are harmless. But here's the deal. Putting on a silly costume doesn't make your ideas better or less harmless. If you are advocating for open borders, complete with criminal illegal aliens and the breakdown of society, excuse me, if you are supporting Hamas, which is a genocidal death cult, and very openly so, against Israel, which is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, if you rail against America, if you dream of Trump's death and killing other conservatives, if you celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, you can put on as many silly animal costumes as you like. You are not a good person. Finally, the costumes, this is my own theory, but I was thinking about it last month, I guess, when I was in the synagogue, and the reading was from Deuteronomy. And not Leviticus. I always get Deuteronomy and Leviticus confused. I am sorry. But anyway, the point was that Moses was saying that one of the most sinful acts, one of the most horrible acts, which deserves instant death, is bestiality. Because the Old Testament divides the world. It divides the world into heaven and earth, land and water, good and evil, godly and godless, human and animal. It also is all about the incredible virtue of procreative sex. Be fruitful and multiply. That's why masturbation is a bad thing, because it's seen as an alternative to a man's obligation to be fruitful and multiply. And so when you have people having sex with animals, they are doing something deeply unclean, and they are not being fruitful and multiplying. It is a double whammy against God. And I think the huge proliferation of furries and animal costumes, a lot of people don't understand it, but I think some people do understand that this is meant to be a slap at the biblical injunction against bestiality. I call it bestiality adjacent, because the practitioners don't really want to have sex with animals. They're Western enough to find that disgusting, but they're leftist enough and anti-biblical enough to want to make the point that this is what they're doing, to want to show that they are giving God the middle finger. And so this is what we are seeing more and more with the furries and the costumes. Anyway, that's my theory, and I am sticking to it. Another thing I'd like to talk about today is what Islam is doing to Europe, what unlimited immigration is doing to Europe. It's all a package thing. This will probably be the largest segment of the podcast. And I'll start with the statement from Aston Villa, which is a major football team in England. Actually, I'm going to back up for a sec. Let me say why I care about Europe. Some of it is personal. Both my parents were European. I grew up in a very, very European environment, even though I speak only English, because my parents, for whatever reason, decided that they were not going to teach us Hebrew, Yiddish, German, French, or Dutch, which were the languages that either one of them or both of them spoke. We spoke only English in the house. But I actually grew up in a house that was very hostile to American culture. My parents were European, so I've always been Europe-oriented. I was a British history major. One of the happiest years of my life was my junior year abroad up in the north of England in the years 1981 through 1982. Wonderful time. That was Maggie Thatcher. It was still a British England. So I've always paid attention to Europe. The other reason, of course, is Europe is ginormous. The entire EU economy, I think, is as big as, if not bigger than, America's economy. Europe shaped the world in which we live. European values shaped American values. Not necessarily all. We weren't that influenced by Spanish values up until the recent border crossings. We were mostly influenced by English values with infusions of French Huguenot and German and Dutch and Norwegian and all sorts of stuff. So they all are our mother country, and Europe is the fountain of Western culture and values, which have served humankind so well. The world's prosperity, America supercharged it, but again, the ideas started with Europe. So yes, I'm interested in Europe. And it matters greatly that Europe is now getting to be more anti-Semitic than it was under, anti-Semitism used to be virulent under Hitler, virulent in Ukraine, which is why I'm not a huge fan of Ukraine even after all these years. And it was virulent in France in the Middle Ages and up through the Dreyfus, but, Vichy government, but it hasn't been virulent in a long time, and it's happening again. That's because of Islamic immigration. There's no way to dress it up. The coming together of leftism, which hates the Bible, and that Jews are the people of the book. So, as they say, first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, and Islam, where Muhammad, whom the Jews rejected as their prophet, got vicious and said, kill them all, comes together in, again, anti-Semitism. So now I will get to this club statement from Aston Villa, which is a major football/soccer team in England. And I'm going to read the statement to you. It's from 3 days ago. Aston Villa can confirm the club has been informed that no away fans, meaning fans from other countries, may attend the UEFA Europa League match with Maccabi Tel Aviv on Thursday, November 6, following an instruction from the Safety Advisory Group. In other words, no Israelis are allowed to attend the game. The Safety Advisory Group are responsible for issuing safety certificates for every match at Villa Park based on a number of physical and safety factors. Following a meeting this afternoon, the SAG have formally written to the club and UEFA to advise no away fans will be permitted to attend Villa Park for this fixture. West Midlands Police have advised the SAG that they have public safety concerns outside the Stadium Bowl and the ability to deal with any potential protests on the night. The club are in continuous dialogue with Maccabi Tel Aviv and the local authorities throughout this ongoing process, with the safety of supporters attending the match and the safety of local residents at the forefront of any decision. Why in the world would Israeli fans be considered too dangerous to attend a match? They are not associated with rampages. But the league is in Birmingham, and Birmingham is the heartbeat of British Islam. The Muslims settled very deliberately in areas that once used to be Jewish. They ended up in London, which had a large Jewish population. And then they ended up in the industrial regions, because those were the regions where Jews were. Jews followed industry. They were up in Yorkshire and Leeds, where I once was, and they were in the Midlands, in the whole Birmingham area, which was a huge industrial heart of Britain. And 20 years ago, I met a woman from Leeds, not Jewish, who told me that I wouldn't recognize Leeds. This was 20 years ago, and the surrounding areas, because they had become so Muslim. And what she told me was that the Muslims deliberately moved into Jewish neighborhoods and drove them out. So these areas that were once Jewish and more Jewish industrial areas in England, and believe me, the Jews were not a violent subgroup in England, have now become extremely Islamic. But why in the world would Aston Villa suddenly decide to do this? Well, this was not an organic thing. It started with a Birmingham member of parliament named Ayub Khan. And he said, "I welcome the news that Maccabi Tel Aviv fans will not be permitted to watch the match at Aston Villa. Well done to all those that signed our petition." And the longer statement is, from the moment that the match was announced, it was clear that there were latent safety risks that even our capable security and police authorities would not be able to fully manage. With so much hostility and uncertainty around the match, it was only right to take drastic measures. And he goes on in this way. Well, where did this hostility and threat of violence come from? Well, of course, the unspoken thing is that it comes from the Muslim fans in Birmingham. They would have caused a riot. There was something similar a while ago in Holland, where Muslim football fans violently attacked Israeli football fans. And I'm using football in the British fashion. Of course, it's really called soccer, as we all know. So what the Muslims are doing is saying, we are so violent, we cannot be controlled. So rather than constraining our violence and punishing us for violence, we will rule. It is the heckler's veto taken from a verbal level to a physical level. This is how Islam operates. This is how it shuts down societies. This is simply the blackmail of violence. Do it our way or we will tear apart your cities. And, of course, Britain caves. And what's tragically ironic about this is Aston Villa's history. I asked ChatGPT, and it did a nice summation of the history. The Aston Villa football team was remembered for refusing to perform the Nazi salute during a football tour of Germany in 1938. At the time, British teams visiting Germany were expected to give the Nazi salute as a diplomatic gesture. You know, kind of like women wearing the burqa. I remember Hillary Clinton veiling herself when she went to Iran. I think it was Hillary. For example, the English national team controversially did so before a friendly match against Germany in Berlin in 1938. But when Aston Villa played several matches in Germany that same year, the players refused to comply. Reports say they were pressured and even threatened by Nazi officials, but the squad stood firm and would not raise their arms. Well, that was when Birmingham was a more Jewish city and a more courageous city and a more values-laden city. Those days are gone. But it's not just that one football match. There's so much more going on. And again, I focus on the UK. The language is the same. It's a culture I know well, and it was the birthplace of the values that drove American liberty. Some of the amendments in the Bill of Rights came right out of the 1689 British Bill of Rights. This is where the founders got their enlightened ideas. So David Collier sums up some of what's been going on. In the last 2 weeks, and this is a tweet I'm reading from, in the last 2 weeks, Jews murdered in Manchester for going to a synagogue, Jews banned from entering Birmingham to see a match, Jews arrested in London for wearing a Star of David. This is the UK in 2025, and nobody in government wants to name those causing the problem. So what is that about someone arrested in London for wearing a Star of David? Well, let me tell you. I'm going to read from the Times of Israel. A Jewish lawyer was arrested in August at a pro-Palestinian anti-Israel protest in London and detained for 10 hours, during which officers claimed his Star of David necklace was antagonizing demonstrators, British media reported on Saturday. Apparently, the Star of David was a little thing, about 1 or 2 centimeters in size around his neck. The suspect is what the Times of Israel called. So the man arrested was part of a group called the Society of Independent Legal Observers, a group he set up earlier in the year with 2 other lawyers to monitor the growing pro-Palestinian anti-Israel protests. So the police deny it, claiming that he was violating an order separating the anti-Israel protest from the pro-Israel counter-protest at the scene. However, the Telegraph obtained footage of the man's lengthy police interview by a detective constable who said he is usually assigned to robbery cases, but had been picked to deal with any excess prisoners that come in as a result of the protest. After the suspect gave a detailed account of his actions ahead of the arrest, the constable took a break and resumed the questioning at 1:50 a.m., so he'd been given 3rd degree. The detective asked the man why he didn't wear anything that overtly identifies you as a legal observer, and accused him of quite closely approaching the protesters with the camera. And here's the kicker. The detective asked if the suspect was stoking the fire with these pro-Palestine protesters, then asked him, "What necklace are you wearing?" And as the accused showed and explained the Star of David's necklace, his lawyer said he was concerned about you raising my client's religion and wearing a sign in relation to that, which I don't think is appropriate. So it goes on and on and on with this interrogation, but clearly the interrogating officer was very perturbed that the lawyer had around his neck a small Star of David, because what we've seen time and time again is that the Palestinians will attack anyone who looks Jewish or who wears something Jewish, and the police in England, rather than corralling the violent Muslim attackers, are preventing Jews from being on the streets lest they trigger one of the Palestinians. But it's not just that. There's more. Some of you may be familiar with a band called Disturbia. It's led by David Dryman, and he's very well known for singing a sort of dead, deep voice version of Simon and Garfunkel, The Sound of Silence. Well, they were the group, and here I'm quoting from Penn Live, Patriot News. The group was scheduled to perform October 15th at the Forest National in Brussels as part of its The Sickness 25th Anniversary Tour. So yes, I'm switching countries. Sometimes I have all these tags open, but this is the first European country. I've left England behind. England is a dead country walking. However, Forest Mayor Charles Spoppins issued a police order banning the concert due to safety concerns after several comments the band's lead singer David Draymond made regarding the conflict in Gaza. Draymond is Jewish. He does not support Gaza. He supports Israel. Going back to the report. My responsibility and priority are the safety of residents, neighbors, demonstrators, spectators, and staff at Forest National, Spoppins said. Given the police's negative advice and the venue's unique location, it was my duty to make this decision. In other words, once again, the mere fact that Draymond was going to be there triggered the Muslims, and the town and Brussels, instead of stopping the violence, shut out the Jew. This is going on over and over in Europe because they're very scared of the violence. I'm next going to show you a snippet of a video from Paul Joseph Watson, and you'll very quickly grasp what's going on without actually having to watch the video. But it's about Germany, and we do not know if the particular immigrants involved in this are Muslims, but we do know that they're part of the cohort that Europe is welcoming into the country.
This story is truly wild. Iris Stolzer is the mayor of Herdecke in Germany. Socialist, big lefty, big supporter of mass migration. Such a vehement advocate, in fact, that she imported an adopted daughter from Mali and an adopted son from Haiti. And that's where her problems began. Despite using the daughter as a virtue signal PR prop for her law firm, this is how things ended up.
The newly elected mayor of the western German town of Herdecke was found in her home with multiple life-threatening stab wounds on Tuesday.
So what happened? Stolzer's adopted son called the police, claiming that a gang of men had attacked his mother. But when police led the son away from the crime scene in an evidence-preserving bodysuit, a different picture began to emerge. A witness said she was found bleeding out in an armchair in a living room. And after she regained consciousness in the hospital, Stolzer reportedly told police that her own adopted son and daughter had attacked her, subjecting her to hours of grueling torture in the basement of her house, trying to set her on fire using a makeshift flamethrower, and stabbing and slicing her 13 times with kitchen knives. Gruesomely.
That was fun. Now we get to the news out of France. More than 1 in 3 babies born in France now have at least one foreign-born parent, is a headline at in a story at Remix, and I'll talk a little more about Remix in a sec. The subhead is the share of babies born to 2 French-born parents has fallen significantly from over 71% a decade ago to 65.9% last year. Socialism kills babies. It doesn't just kill them through abortion, although as a reminder, America's had, I think, 63 million abortions since 1973. I don't even know how many abortions Europe has had. But socialism also just is hostile to families. It's hostile to men. It's hostile to allowing women to raise children. Climate change has frightened young people into thinking that they're destroying planet Earth if they have children, although who do they think they're saving planet Earth for if there are no children? They're saving it for the forest. They're saving it for bugs. What gives the earth meaning is human beings. If you take away the human beings, the earth is just a planet drifting from space. But what Europe did was it stopped having babies after World War II as it became socialized. And then when its population dropped, and when leftists pushed Islam, it started importing people who will have babies. But the people who will have babies don't share the European values, because even though Europeans are socialist and want the government to pay for them, and big government and cradle to grave and euthanasia and abortion, they also still have some of those old values, and they have invited in people who do not have those values and are having lots and lots of babies. Across Europe, only the Muslims and some other immigrant groups are having babies. Meanwhile, I don't know how I found Remix, but Remix has headlines about immigrants in Europe. And I'm just This is today's remix, and I'm just going to read you some of the headlines. Somali migrant is the prime suspect in fatal stabbing of Ukrainian teen at Dublin Refugee Center. That's one. I'll kill your mother and your big sister. Iraqi migrant accused of murdering the mother of his 7 children on the same day as their wedding anniversary. That's another one. Moroccan teacher in France sent into prison for fake racist death threats. So, taking advantage of the situation. Germany, Sedomar R. intentionally runs over a cyclist with his BMW, according to police. Netherlands, psychotic meat cleaver Islamic accused of fatal Rotterdam attack should not be spared jail on mental health grounds, experts tell court. That mental health grounds, what's happened in Europe is that any Islamic attack is defined as a mental health problem. The theory is that if you have good mental health, you wouldn't be killing people. Therefore, if you're killing people, you must have a mental health problem and should not be punished. Another effect of the migration in Europe, German education disaster. Test scores continue crashing in math, chemistry, and physics. And it goes on and on and on. So it's if you want to see what's happening in Europe, go to Remix. It's not all the news. It's very focused on Europe's collapse, but there's a definite thread to all the posts. Speaking of Europe, I want to talk about Pope Leo XIV. I'm not a fan of Pope Leo XIV because he seems to me to be an English-speaking version of Pope Francis. And I was not a fan of Pope Francis for the same reason that Rush Limbaugh was not a fan of Pope Francis. Pope Francis was a communist. He represented the liberation theology march through the Catholic Church, and liberation theology was birthed in the Soviet Union and imported mostly to Latin America. And what it simply did was eat out the church from the inside by grafting communism onto certain Christian precepts. And what it did is it took often Christian precepts that were meant for the individual, like charity, and said the government should do it, and all sorts of things like that. And it did away with, I think it was Paul who wrote that the church is responsible for people's souls, but the state is responsible for keeping the rule of law, for imposing justice, although that justice should be infused by Christian morality. And pardon me if I'm wrong about it being Paul. And so liberation theology is communism in a Catholic skin suit. And Pope Leo is following in that same footstep. And because I am opposed to communism, I am opposed to Pope Leo. I'm not opposed to the Vatican in principle. As readers know, I'm a huge fan of Christianity, but not the fanatic antisemitic witch-burning Christianity of the late Middle Ages, nor am I a fan of the communist Christianity of the modern left. So that's my premise about I'm about to attack Pope Leo. So if you're offended, I apologize, but I'm going to attack him anyway. So this is a story from September 13th. Pope hints at Lampedusa visit in strong echo of Francis on migrants and refugees. Now, Lampedusa is an island off the coast of Italy, and it is where it is the gateway for all the illegal immigrants who come by boats from the Middle East and Africa. An enormous number of whom are Muslim, but many are also sub-Saharan Africans who bring with them certain tribal values that are inconsistent with traditional European values. So anyway, the Pope has been talking about going to Lampedusa, and in the typical flowery language that English translated into Italian or Italian translated into England comes from, Pope had thanked the people of Lampedusa back in September for everything they're doing. And he cited to Pope Francis, who who had basically said anybody who believes Europe should be for Europeans is bad. And I'm quoting Pope Leo now. So I'm reading from an article at cruxnow.com. Pope Francis denounced the globalization of indifference beginning precisely in Lampedusa. By now, this attitude seems to have mutated into a globalization of impotence before justice and innocent suffering, the pontiff said, speaking in Italian. We're more aware of what's happening, but the risk is just standing still, silent and sad, overcome by the sensation there's nothing we can do. What can I possibly do facing such evil? I'm going to stop here. You might think that the evil is the destruction of Lampedusa, a small island of 6,000 people, which is being completely overrun by Middle Eastern and North African immigrants who share no values with Lampedusa, and as I know from other things I've written, have brought in an enormous amount of crime. But that's not what the Pope is talking about. Instead, and I'm picking up again, my thanks for your witness, which is really the thanks of the entire church, extends and renews that of Pope Francis, he said. Thanks to the associations, volunteers, mayors, and administrations that have succeeded one another over time. Thank you to priests, doctors, security forces, and all those who, often invisibly, have shown and continue to show a smile and the care of a human face to survivors on their desperate journey of hope. In other words, Leo is all about the non-Christian, non-European, Muslim, and African tribal people swamping Lampedusa and going from there into Italy and the rest of the European Union. That is where his care is. And he talks about the migrant brothers and sisters buried in Lampedusa. Well, these attitudes have their effect. So at today's Telegraph, the British Telegraph, which I'm able to read thanks to the kindness of a friend who shared shared a subscription like illegally. He got a free subscription and gave it to me, which was very nice of him. Pope's visit is an insult, say residents on Italian island overrun with migrants. And the article begins, when Pope Leo XIV makes good on his promise to visit the tiny island of Lampedusa, some will cheer his message of solidarity for the hundreds of thousands of migrants who have landed on its shores. Giuseppe Pino Daietti will not be among them. Like many of Lampedusa's 6,000 inhabitants, he is tired of living on an island that has become the gateway to Europe for boatloads of asylum seekers who cross the Mediterranean from Libya and Tunisia. He is angry that the Italian authorities devote huge resources to rescuing and processing the new arrivals while neglecting the needs of the island, a sliver of limestone rock and scrub that lies closer to North Africa than to Italy. The Pope's visit will be an insult to Lampedusa. He's not coming for us. He's coming for the migrants, said the 81-year-old former plumber sitting on a bench in the main street of the island's only settlement. When the Pope comes, he'll express solidarity with migrants and remember those who died at sea. But no one remembers us. No one commemorates all the island's fishermen who lost their lives, says the pensioner who likes to belt out Neapolitan and Sicilian songs to friends in the evenings. We have no doctors here. We have no hospital. The refugees have the Red Cross, but all we have is a black cross against our names. There are services for migrants, but not for us islanders. Whether they arrive in small number or large numbers, the problems of the island never get resolved. And then there's an interesting picture. I could keep reading and reading, but there's an interesting picture of the migrants coming, and they're all shades of black and brown. They're obviously not Europeans, and every single one of them is a military-aged man. So think about that for a moment. It's not just abroad, of course. It's also at home. Zohran Mandami is a huge problem. We're going to be publishing a fantastic essay tomorrow by Joseph Cotto about Mandami's father and the mindset that gave birth to Mandami. But the important thing to remember, something you all know, is an anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish Muslim who's a communist, is on the verge of becoming mayor of New York City. I don't need to say more. You guys all know. And yesterday, or day before yesterday, he tweeted out, "Today at Masjid at-Taqwa, I had the pleasure of meeting with Imam Siraj Wahaj, one of the nation's foremost Muslim leaders and a pillar of the Bedford-Stuyvesant region community for nearly half a century." So he has a picture of him arm in arm with this man. And Andy No replied, "Imam Siraj Wahaj was a co-conspirator of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing jihadist attack who escaped justice. In 2023, his son and 2 daughters were convicted at trial for their role in planning Islamic terror attacks while living in an Islamic separatist compound in New Mexico. They killed a young child there." When Barack Obama went to a pro-Palestinian event, and I forget if it was during his 2008 campaign, I think it was, what happened there was so explosive that the Los Angeles Times still has not released the footage, because had they released the footage, Obama could not have been elected. And even now, if they release the footage, it will be so explosive about who Obama was and what Obama was. It's just buried. It's deep six. Nobody knows what really happened. But in 2025, in New York City, the most Jewish city in America, the heart of American capitalism, Mandami isn't worried about this. This is what he tweets out. This is what he wants voters to know about him. This is leftist America in 2025. And yes, he'll probably win New York, but God willing, New York is not representative of all of America. And frankly, I say this with tremendous compassion for those New Yorkers whom I know and love and who are conservatives. The ones I know personally, you know who you are. I'm sorry to say this. The ones I don't know personally, I'm still sorry to say this. But Mandami needs to fail big time in New York so that people really see how his fusion of Islam and Marxism works in real time, away from the pretty rhetoric and his handsome smiling face. It'll get very, very ugly if that toxin is allowed to spread out of New York. We're already seeing the disaster in Chicago and Portland. Normal Americans are pushing back. More of them need to push back. And if you can't be a good example, you may as well be a horrible example. And that is exactly what New York is lining up to be. On that note, I'm calling it quits. Thank you so much for, again, listening to me waffle on. I really, really appreciate it. So let's see if we can get this podcast going a little bit. Podcasts are the future. I know you guys are all readers because you're American Thinker fans, and we will always be there for the readers, but we really do need to expand into a different market and add podcasts to our repertoire. So if you like this, share it. Thank you so much. Talk to you later.